Welcome to Whispers to a Bride, where we talk about the stuff no one else is talking about. We are going deep on the emotional aspects of getting married, the stress, drama, and turbulence that affects your own sense of identity and your closest relationships. We are talking about what it means to be a bride and how to navigate this sacred time with more grace and ease. I'm your host, Kara Gassabay. As a life coach and therapist, I'm going to be sharing super practical tips so that you can not only rise to the occasion of your wedding, but also your life. Hello, and welcome back. Today I want to talk about after the ring. So this is that sort of space right after you get engaged and you go through that sort of rush of excitement and you're telling all your friends and family and you're just really excited. Maybe you've been waiting for this moment. Maybe it was a surprise. Probably it wasn't, but it was really special and sweet and thoughtful and just like a really beautiful moment, whether it was like a big grand affair or whether it was just the two of you and it was really quiet and really casual. The engagement is such a special, fun, like usually intimate time that is just awesome, right? There's usually like a really good like high that comes after it. But then, like all things that go up, they also must come down. And that crash, sort of after the ring crash, I like to think of it, is super normal. And I've had a few people reach out to me about it lately. So I wanted to just give a little moment on the podcast just to sort of remind us that this is okay. And it doesn't mean that anything has gone wrong. It's just the beginning of a reconfiguration, sort of mentally, spiritually, emotionally, logistically, financially, familially, that happens when you're engaged, right? All of a sudden, it went from something that was going to be in the future, like maybe one day, to like all of a sudden it's here. And accepting that proposal is like kind of pushing down that first domino. And now lots of other things are going to follow from there and flow from that place. And so you can get a little caught off guard by maybe the feelings of anxiety or overwhelm or fear or sadness or just whatever sort of you're labeling as negative emotions that comes after that high. And it can feel really confusing. You're like, what's like, I thought it was going to feel so different. And it really feels scary or overwhelming or like anxiety producing or just whatever it is. I just want you to know it is super, super normal to sort of have a little down after the high of the engagement. And there's a couple things that are going on here. And two of them, I think I've talked about before on the podcast, but they're just pretty fundamental issues that happen with your fiance around this time that I think it just deserves another reminder. The first is that you're going public. When you accept a marriage proposal, it's like a public declaration for the first time. Like you've never really had to explain or legitimize your relationship in a formal way before. When you're dating, people might like say, oh, it's serious or it's not or whatever. Like it's not sort of real in the public domain until that engagement happens. And so once you sort of go public by accepting the proposal, that just starts a lot of chatter a lot of times. It's sort of newsworthy in your own little world. And in like a very real way, your name is probably most likely to appear in your local newspaper when you pass away and they publish that, or when your little marriage announcement goes out. Not everyone does them anymore, but that's just, it's very like, it goes in the newspaper that you're getting married. So that like idea of going public is a real thing. And it can just make you feel a certain way, right? Like they say, a watched pot never boils. Like it's this idea of something changes a little bit when there's eyeballs on it and you just feel a little different in your relationship when you've got maybe a lot of people asking about it or passing judgment about it or making narratives around it. it can just be a little stressful sort of to enter that public space with your relationship. The other thing, of course, is the forever lens. And I think I've talked about that. That now all of a sudden you're looking at your fiance in just like a different way. When you're dating, it's like, oh, you love this person, but also like your life is still like up for grabs and anything can happen. And like there's just that like question mark around the future. But now that you are engaged, that door kind of closes and now you're looking at your fiance and everything that they do with the forever lens. So like what used to not bother you because you had your own apartment or you had your own approach, now that you are going to be joined in this like very serious way, you're like, ugh, I thought it was okay that he had this habit or this hobby or this interest or this friend group or this, messiness or this procrastination or this financial approach. And now that you're like joining your lives together in this legal way, it feels like, ugh, a little more stressful. And like there feels like there needs to be things that you talk about and that you sort of negotiate and figure out, and some things that you're going to need to accept, some things that you're going to need to change, some things that maybe they will need to accept or change and build compromise and have conversations. So that whole idea of the forever lens can also just like lead to some conflict that maybe you weren't having before you got engaged. Now all of a sudden that conflict is coming up. Make sure that you remind yourself that it can be super normal sort of renegotiation of your roles and your identities as you are going into marriage. It's very normal to feel some discomfort in your relationship as you're starting to look at it with a whole new lens of like, wow, for a boyfriend, I don't care about this, but for a husband, ugh, it just hits different, as the young people say. So I just kind of wanted to remind you of those two things. And also just that no matter what, I think this is one of the things that women often do. The narrative that the culture sells us is that when we get engaged, we're going to feel a certain way. And it's very much like you were picked, you were chosen. Somehow now you're good enough. Now you're safe. Now you're worthy, right? There's a lot that happens with women around getting married and being in this relationship, being partnered with a romantic partner and being given this label, that it really just carries like all this extra stuff culturally with it. And whether or not you buy into that, whether you care about that, I think it's still there. It's in the air that we breathe. And so you got to acknowledge the effect that that might be having on you. And so it's funny for a lot of women, they didn't really consciously realize it, but they just had sort of bought into that myth that like once they were engaged, they were going to feel like a person who was engaged. And they didn't even know what it meant until we really sit down and unpack it together. And they just thought there would be much more of a feeling of like safety and security and worthiness and beauty and feeling of like having arrived and this whole idea. And then it's like, okay, well, you got the ring and you said yes. And like, and then it's almost like whoosh, like there's that exhale, there's that down. And so I just really want to acknowledge it. It's like anything. I always, for some reason, the analogy I always think of is with weight loss clients. I never did weight loss coaching, but a lot of obviously people in my industry really do. And they always talk about having to work with their clients on the fact that like you will not feel that different when you reach the goal weight in the way that you think you will. Like you're still you. And again, it's just this idea that comes up in all sort of situations that you're getting therapy on or you're getting coached on. Like we tell ourselves that we're going to feel a certain way when we hit a certain milestone or goal or whatever it is or moment in our life. And then we get there and we're like, oh, it's still me. I still feel the same way. I've still got the same hangups and insecurities and aspirations and feelings of, not being sure of myself or feelings of anxiety or worry that like I really were hoping we're going to go away. In this case with the engagement, we really just thought that like one huge piece of our life would be solved. And in some way it is like a big question is answered, who you're going to marry. Well, now you know. But in other ways that like it doesn't solve all your problems, right? Your work problems are still there, your friendship stuff's still there, your family stuff is still there. And instead of simplifying it, it also can add more complexity to your life. So for as much as it simplifies in the sense that now you know which path you are walking down in terms of your personal romantic life, it adds a whole lot of other variables with like in-laws and how to merge your finances and your living situation and your goals and all of that stuff. So it adds a lot of complexity and nuance to your life as well that can also be something you didn't really plan on being as difficult as it is because you only had romanticized this moment in your mind and you'd only thought about the ways in which it was going to make everything easier or more wonderful or fabulous. And so that just gauzy idea of what it means to become a bride and just you're going to have a moment after the ring where you're like, it does not feel the way I wanted it to feel. And I just want to remind you that is okay. That is completely normal. In this chapter of your life, while it is really, really special and sacred and wonderful and full of love, and it's also just full of a lot of hard stuff too. And I don't want you to panic and think that it means that something's wrong with you. It's not. It's just part of it. It's just the part that like people don't talk about as much, and that's okay. You can talk about it. And that is literally why I'm here. I love talking about the hard parts of engagement and wedding planning and newlywed life. So you're in the right place if you have found this podcast and you can work with me one-on-one and we can figure out how to help you with this sort of like downer that can come after the ring and really decipher what's going on for you specifically in your relationship, what it means going forward, how to work with it, how to deal with it, what conversations need to be had, what realizations need to be come to, what practices might you need to incorporate into your life. And so if you're interested in that, find me at karamorning.com. Hit me up on TikTok and Instagram, Kara the Bridal Coach. And most importantly, if you find this stuff helpful, these conversations helpful, two things. Let me know what you want to hear more about. Find me on social and just like tell me the topics you want to hear more about. And number two, pass this along to a friend, whether she just got married or she's engaged to be married or you think she's close to that point in life. I know that like we sort of as women kind of go through these life transitions together, like as a whole crew. So do me a favor, push this out to your posse and I will be forever grateful. So until next time, I am wishing you nothing but bridal bliss.